Hi, I'm Claire, and I'm going to take you through all the steps on how I transformed my ceiling with this inexpensive faux shiplap that looks exactly like the real thing. So this room functions as our pantry in this nook here, our laundry room, and our mudroom. And as you can see, it was in dire need of some organization and decluttering. I am in the process of making over this full room, and it's actually pretty close to being complete. So far, I've taken this cluttered corner here and turned it into this custom locker built-in with tons of storage. I'm also in the process of converting this nook here into a full-on built-in pantry area and even removed the hanging laundry racks and built new ones that tuck away and roll into this cabinet. So back to the ceiling. In order to finish these built-in units, I really needed to deal with the ceiling because it was completely unlevel in a few places. It was particularly bad in the corners, like in this nook here, and since I had put so much effort into these built-ins, I really wanted to correct this issue, so I had a nice even reveal around the top of them. So the first step was to figure out which way my ceiling joists ran and to mark them out. It's easier to install your boards perpendicular to the joist so that each board hits part of the joist and you have something secure to nail into. However, in my case, I'm adding ceiling beams to the ceiling as well, and because of where I'm locating them, it made more sense for my boards to run parallel to the joist. Since not all boards will hit a joist, I use both glue and nails to adhere them. More on that in a bit. And since my ceiling was really out of level, I did take the step to level it first by shimming the high spots and adding some underlayment 4x8 foot sheets of plywood first. This step is totally optional, but since I was taking the time to do this ceiling, I wanted to make sure I got it leveled out first. For the shiplap boards, I used the same underlayment plywood sheets and ripped them down into 5 3/4 strips to mimic real shiplap. This product is also sometimes called utility plywood, and it's smooth on one side, making it the perfect option for painting or staining. It varies in thicknesses, but the most common is 5 millimeters, which is just under 1/4 of an inch in thickness. I calculated that I needed 5 sheets to do my ceiling, and at less than $15 per sheet, I got all my shiplap boards for under $75. Regular shiplap ranges between $17 and $20 for one 8-foot board, and the cheapest I've seen it is this special at $14.98 a board. So for the 39 boards I needed, that would have cost me $585 in regular shiplap. I measured the full width of my ceiling, and because I'm ripping down these sheets, I can customize the width of each board. This way I'm not left with an awkward skinny strip at one end. I started by dividing the width of my ceiling by 6 inches, as this is the size of a traditional shiplap board. So it ended up working out perfectly with 13 rows. So this meant my boards were going to be 5 3/4 inches with a 1/4 inch spacer in between each board. Now that I had this number, I ripped down 2 scrap pieces and took my spacer, which was a paint stir stick, and made my way across the ceiling to make sure my calculations were accurate. If your calculation doesn't divide evenly, for example, say you end up with 13.2 boards, round down or up to the closest full number, for example, 13, and then divide your ceiling width by that number to get the custom width for your board. This might make your board under or over 6 inches slightly. That's okay. I always try to aim between 5.5 and 6 inches for my board width. I used my Craig rip guide attached to my circular saw to cut down all of the boards. I set my guide to 5 3/4 inches and then ripped down the sheets of plywood, which gave me 8 boards per sheet. You could also rip these down on a table saw. They're just a little awkward and it would be much easier with another set of hands. You can also check at your local building store, as some of them do rip them down for you as well. I love this rip guide though because it allows me to rip down full sheets of plywood by myself. Although these underlayment plywood sheets are not heavy, they are a little bit flimsy and awkward to try and move through a table saw by yourself. And because these plywood sheets are on the thinner side, having a foam insulation board like the one I have here can be really helpful to help support the wood as you're cutting through. They're pretty inexpensive, and I use this foam insulation board to rip down all different sizes and thicknesses of plywood boards all the time. Once I had the boards all ripped down to the 5 3/4 inch width, I started the preparation for the boards. Since I was limited on space, I just did these in sections. So I'd lay like 4 or 5 boards out, get them primed, and then set them aside, and then work on the next set. You can see here how nice the wood grain is on these underlayment sheets. These boards tend to be nice on one side, and on the other side, they're quite rough. They'll tend to have knots or voids like you see here. But it just goes to show you that if you didn't want to prime and paint these, you could definitely stain them and they have a beautiful wood grain. Here's an example of some that I stained on my dog crate that I built. These underlayment sheets really are so versatile, but as with all lumber, I always take the time to pick through for the best boards as the lumber quality can vary. I start by priming the boards. I'm using Zinsser's Bullseye water-based primer. And even with picking through the boards, you're going to find the odd imperfection. I just wood fill these and then sand them smooth. I use these Gator sanding sponges for this. This is a 220 grit on this sanding sponge, and they are phenomenal. I cannot recommend these enough. Once all the boards are primed, I hit the edges. It's easier, I find, to do this all in one go. Remember, this is a plywood product, so the edges aren't always perfect. You don't need to wood fill them though, unless you have any serious voids, as the paint does fill it and you're not going to really see the edges. Then I sanded the front face of all of the boards. I'm using 220 grit here, and then wipe them all free of the dust with a tack cloth. Once all the boards are sanded, then I'm applying 2 coats of flat sealing paint. I made sure to hit all of the edges of each of the boards so that the paint will fill any gaps. And my biggest tip here is to not skip any of the sanding stages in between all of the coats of paint. It's definitely the key to a smooth pro level finish. I made sure to use flat sealing paint for the top coats on these boards because flat paint doesn't reflect the light and it lessens the chances of any imperfections showing on the ceiling. I already had half a can of sealing paint on hand, so I used Deluxe White Acrylic Latex paint. All right, on to installation. I divided my ceiling into 3 sections, and I'll be building faux beams to put in between each section. For now, I'm just installing some 2x4 support pieces for the beams and to separate the sections. I cut all my boards to length using my chop saw. Because each of the sections have the same length boards, I just set up a stop on the end of my saw and just cut them all to the same length. I cut all the boards just slightly shy of the length that I needed so that I could push the boards straight up against the wall. And then on the other end, the beam is going to hide the seam, so it didn't matter as much. And then grabbed a bunch of stir sticks. This is what I'm using as the spacing between each board. Before I started installing the boards, I measured the full width of the ceiling and marked a few reference points between both ends. I took my time with the first few boards to make sure I was lining up to those reference points. This way I could ensure I was getting a straight line down the center of the room, as I didn't want to rely on the exterior wall, as I know it had some issues. I made sure to double check my reference points every so often. These boards are nice and lightweight, so it's definitely a project that you could do solo, but it is a bit of an arm workout, so an extra set of hands couldn't hurt. Then I temporarily took down those beam supports so that I could carry the lines through to the next section. I did this by placing my spacers in between the first set of boards and then continued them on down into the next set. I used a combination of wood glue and pin nails to install the boards. Because I had previously leveled the ceiling and had underlayment plywood up there, I used quite a bit of glue as I wasn't worried about doing any damage to my ceiling should I want to take this down. Removing these boards once they've been glued up will damage the drywall underneath. The other option for putting these up without using any glue or adhesive would be to angle your nails away from each other, keeping the board nice and tight to the ceiling. Pin nails leave very small holes, which is great for minimal filling. You could also use brad nails as well. These leave slightly bigger holes to fill. Or your best bet is to apply the boards perpendicular to the joists in the ceiling. That way they have something secure to be nailed into. For this last section, I had to cut around the built-in that goes straight up to the ceiling. So I took a couple of measurements and used a combination of my chop saw and table saw. To cut around all the light fixtures and the vents in the ceiling, I used my jigsaw and this hole saw, which was a little bit too small, so I just did it in a couple of sections. Once I had one section complete, I filled all the nail holes. A great tip is to use a little bit of green painter's tape up there for where you filled. This way you don't miss any when you're going to sand them. And it avoids any errors of painting over wood filler where you might have missed some. Once all the shiplap was up, I screwed the supports back up for the beams. Then I touched up the ceiling with the last coat of paint. Then I put all of the vent covers and ceiling fixtures back into the ceiling. And this is the main part of the ceiling with all of the shiplap boards installed. I also made these faux beams out of inexpensive pine boards for only $35 per beam using some really simple, easy techniques. So definitely check out my next video if you want to see how I built those. Don't forget to hit that like button if you found this video helpful. And stay tuned because I still have the 2 little nooks to finish in this room and add all of the finishing details. So hit that subscribe button if you want to see more budget-friendly DIYs like this. Thanks for watching.